Oh, that was a good song. So that was somebody singing something. Now, we reached Pino del Agua on September 10th. Pino del Agua is a hamlet built around a sawmill in the middle of a forest in the Maestra. During that period, it was managed by a Spaniard. There was a handful of workers, but not one soldier. We occupied the hamlet, and Fidel disclosed his itinerary to the villagers, calculating that someone among them would pass the information on to the army. We engaged in a small diversionary maneuver, and while Fidel's column continued its march towards Santiago in full view of all, we made a detour during the night and laid an ambush for the enemy. We distributed the men in such a way that all the army trucks would be under surveillance. We extended our surveillance to the road from Yao to Pica Verde at some distance before Pino del Agua, but we did not neglect the more direct trail that went up the Maestra, which could not be traversed by trucks. The Pica Verde group was very small, armed with hunting rifles and charged with giving the alarm in case of need, since it was a good road for withdrawal. In fact, we counted, page 162, in fact, we counted on using it after the action. Efigenio Amarahiras was in charge of keeping watch over one of the rear guard access roads, which also came from the Pico Verde sector. Lelo Sardinas and his squad remained in the Zapato zone, guarding several lumber roads, which end on the banks of the Peladero, but that was a superfluous precaution, since in order to reach these roads, the enemy would have had to make a very long march up the mountain. Furthermore, it was not like their custom to march through the forest in columns. Serra Redondo and all his platoon were in charge of defending the access from Siberia. We waited for the army in a forest on a cliff along the road that mounted from Guso, so that as to surprise the trucks and concentrate our firepower. The spot chosen permitted us to observe the arrival of the trucks from a great distance. The plan was simple. We would fire on them from both sides, immobilizing the first truck at a bend in the road and firing on all the others in order to halt them. The platoon, which was supposed to go into action, had the best arms, and some of Captain Raul Castro Mercader's men came to reinforce them. We spent about 7 days in ambush, waiting patiently before anyone arrived. On the 7th day, someone came to inform me that the enemy was approaching. Since the gradients are very steep, we heard the humming of the motors even before we saw them, as the trucks attempted to clamber up the terrible slope and prepared for battle. At the most important spot, we placed those men who were under Captain Ignacio Perez's command. They were to stop the first truck. 20 minutes before the first confrontation, a torrential downpour fell, soaking us to the bone. Meanwhile, the enemy soldiers were advancing, more concerned with rain than with the possibility of an attack. The comrade charged with opening hostilities fired his Tommy gun but hit nobody. The fusillade became general, and the soldiers in the first truck, more frightened and surprised than hurt by our attack, leaped to the road and disappeared behind the cliff after killing Jose de La Crucito, one of our great fighters and the poet of our column. An enemy soldier took refuge under the truck at the bend in the road and let no one raise his head. A minute or two passed before I arrived at the combat sites. I realized that many men were retreating in obedience to a false order, a frequent accident in the midst of combat. Archimedes Fonseca was wounded in the hand while retrieving a submachine gun abandoned by its gunner. We had to give orders for everyone to return to his combat post and to ask Lalo Sardinas and Epigenio Amerihiras forces to cooperate with us. There was a fighter named Tatton on the road as I walked down it. He said to me, defiance in his voice, he's there, under the truck. Let's go, let's go. I summoned up my courage, deeply disgusted by these cowardly cries, but when we tried to approach the enemy fighter who was firing on us from behind the truck, we had to acknowledge that we were going to pay dearly for our display of courage. The Army trucks numbered 5, and they transported one company. The squad led by Antonio Lopez carried out precisely its orders not to allow anyone to pass after the opening of hostilities. Nevertheless, a group of soldiers resisting energetically impeded our advance. Lalo and Epigenio arrived to reinforce us. They charged the trucks and liquidated the seat of resistance. Some of the soldiers fled in disarray. Others in the 2 trucks they had salvaged, leaving behind them all the ammunition. Thanks to Gilberto Caldero, we received some information concerning certain of their plans. This comrade had been taken prisoner during a reconnaissance mission in another sector. He had remained captive for a certain time, and the enemy had brought him along to poison Fidel. All he had to do was empty the contents of a file in Fidel's food. When he heard the shots, Caldero climbed down from the truck like all soldiers, but instead of fleeing the fusillade, he reported to us at once and rejoined our ranks. When we surrounded the first truck, we found 2 dead and 1 wounded soldier who was still going through the motions of battle. As he lay dying, the process was coldly terminated for him by one of our men. The combatant responsible for this act of barbarism had seen his family decimated by the Batista army. I reproached him violently, unaware that my remarks were overheard by another wounded soldier concealed and motionless under some tarpaulins on the truck bed. Emboldened by my words and the way the comrade had asked to be excused, the enemy soldier made his presence known and begged us not to kill him. He had a fractured leg. Every time a fighter passed near him, he would shout, "Don't kill me, don't kill me, Shay says not to kill prisoners." When the battle was over, we transported him to the sawmill and gave him first aid. As for the other trucks, we had inflicted only light losses, but a good number of weapons remained in our possession. The outcome of the battle: 1 automatic gun, 5 Garands, 1 tripod machine gun and its ammunition, and another Garand, which Epigenio Armijaras troop belonging to Fidel's column made off with. Epigenio judged his platoon's participation in the battle to have been decisive. Consequently, he felt they had a right to certain captured weapons, but Fidel had left this detachment under my orders simply to lend us a helping hand. So that regardless of all their protestations, I divided the trophies among the men of my column except for the Garand, which had already been appropriated. The Browning went to Antonio Lopez for his excellent performance. The Garands went to Lieutenant Joel Iglesias Vareles, a member of the Quarantina expedition who had joined up with us, Onate, and 2 others whose names I don't remember. We then set about burning the 3 captured trucks since they were unsalvageable. While we were assembling our troops, some planes passed overhead, but several bursts of gunfire from our direction sufficed to drive them away. Mingolo, one of the Bardo brothers, had been sent to warn Fidel of the approaching guards, but we decided to send another messenger accompanied by Caldera, who would recount his adventure. To tell him the results of our battle, we sent word to Cerro to withdraw from his position. Mongo Martinez carried that message. After a few minutes, we heard gunfire. A group of our men, armed with hunting rifles, had discovered a soldier who was advancing surreptitiously. They shouted to him to halt. Since he ignored the command, they fired at him. The man fled, abandoning his gun. They brought us a Springfield. As evidence of their exploit, it seemed strange to us that there were still dispersed soldiers in the sector. Nevertheless, the gun was added to our tally. 2 days later, Mongo Martinez returned. He told us that some enemy soldiers had taken them by surprise, firing on him with hunting rifles, and that he had to flee because he was wounded. His face was covered with powder marks, so he was the source of the Springfield which our comrades had seized from the enemy. The result had been that this wounded comrade, thinking the guards to be very near, had taken a crossroad and got lost in the woods. He hadn't let Sarah Redondo know about our battle nor transmitted the withdrawal order to him. The next day, Ciro sent a messenger to us, and the order was conveyed to him when the B-26s were buzzing. The sawmill in search of victims. We were calmly having our breakfast installed in various parts of the building. We drank hot chocolate brought to us by the mistress of the house, who was not exactly cheered by the sight of the B-26s passing and repassing, almost grazing the roof. They finally flew off, and we utterly relaxed, were about to leave when we saw on the road from Siberia, the same one that Sarah had been watching a few hours earlier, 4 trucks full of soldiers. But it was already too late. A good number of our men had fallen back to safer positions. We fired in the air twice, the retreat signal, and we quietly left. This battle, important for its repercussions, and news of it spread throughout Cuba, took a toll among the enemy of 3 dead and 1 wounded. In addition, we took a prisoner captured by Efigeno's platoon the next day when we passed through the riddled zone for the last time. It was Corporal Alejandro, who remained with us as our cook until the end of the war. Crucito was buried at the site of our battle. Our entire troop was grief-stricken, having lost in him a noble comrade and its peasant bard. Worthy of citation for this battle are Efigenio Amara Harris, Lelo Sardinas, Captain Victor Mora, Lieutenant Antonio Lopez and his squad, Dermidio Escalona, and Archimedes Fonsecas. It is to the latter that the tripod machine gun was entrusted. He would be using it after his hand was healed. On our side, we had 1 death, 1 case of light wounds, some contusions, some scratches, not to mention the bullets that poor Mongo stopped. We left Pino del Agua by various routes with plans to regroup in the Pico Verde sector. There we would reorganize ourselves while waiting for Comrade Fidel's arrival. Analysis of the battle revealed that although a political and military victory, it bore the traces nonetheless of our enormous shortcomings. The factor of surprise ought to have been exploited to the hilt, so as to overwhelm the first 3 trucks. Furthermore, after hostilities had broken out, a false order to retreat had been circulated, leading the men to lose control and cooling their fighting ardor. A lack of punch was evident in seasoned trucks, which were defended by a small number of soldiers. It must be added, too, that by spending the night at the sawmill, we were exposing ourselves stupidly, and the final withdrawal was carried out in the great disorder. All this proved the imperative necessity of improving battle preparations and discipline among our troop, a task to which we were to devote ourselves in the days to come. We'll stop there, pick up on page 167 later on. Peace.